Welcome to another episode of Tennis Channel Inside In on the Tennis Channel Podcast Network. Mitch Michals from the Santa Monica Studios. Miami Open still in full effect. Special guest now, second time on the show. Maybe the busiest guy in Los Angeles, West LA, but it's Noah Eagle, fresh off the Clippers, fresh off calling matches and doing TC Live at Tennis Channel. Noah, thanks for coming back on the show.
So, I don't know, have you heard of the show The Boys?
Yeah.
Okay, do you watch The Boys?
I've heard of it. I'm adjacent to The Boys.
Okay,
yeah,
fair.
go ahead.
So there's a character on there, MM.
Yeah.
Can I call you MM?
You can call it, yeah, you can. I'll give you that permission
MM,
for sure.
This is a pleasure.
You got
Second time's the charm.
Two-timers club. We'll get you a jacket and everything.
Is that how it works?
Know?
Is it like the Masters?
It
you
is.
get a green jacket? What is it?
Well, you were like the OG, like small room. We were talking about this like before we upgraded, like just when the show was starting. So yeah, we're really just, onward and upward.
Yeah, I don't think people got to see us the first time when we did this, but we were basically cheek to cheek. We got real close.
You get to know your fellow employees together, so that's good.
Yeah, for sure.
So I mean, just starting here because in the last 2 years it's been crazy. But how jam packed has it been for you? You've taken on more assignments, and I didn't know that was physically possible. But we can get into all this stuff, the Olympics, the different sports, but. How has it been just managing your schedule, just adding new roles to the arsenal?
Yeah, I mean, it's been fun because I love all the things that I do, but challenging is probably the right word for it. And especially since the last time we chatted, it was still in the sense of COVID and things weren't really to the level that they were supposed to be or where you expect them to be in terms of traveling all the time, right?
Yeah.
And so you add that factor in and it completely changes everything. So I love the travel. That's why I got into this, is because I want to be at the events. And so that part has been exciting and adventurous, and getting to see places maybe I haven't gone before has been great, but different.
Yeah, it's a good point, because we were talking, it was right around the time, it was, I think, just post-NBA bubble, and you were talking about exciting to get on the road. And timing is everything, right? Because you start your career at a point when you're not really traveling, and then it's like, all right, here we go, we're back on the road. I wonder if one of the challenges you face is jumping sport to sport. Is it as hard as it looks on the outside when you go from tennis to Clippers and all the stuff in between? Is it hard to balance and kind of get in the role and get in the zone?
So what's funny is, especially considering I do the Clippers on radio by myself. So most people that talk to themselves for a living, or not for a living, but in general, get labeled as crazy. If you do it for a living, you get paid.
If you just do it outside.
If you're just talking to yourself, you go, son, avoid that young man over there. Try to stay away. Steer clear of his area. But for me, it's, we want to hear more. However, I'm talking so much over the course of that time that then I go over and do some TV assignments, and people say, well, isn't it hard to try to turn that part of your brain off? And I'm not saying this just because we're doing the podcast and we're at TC right now, but working here has been the best education for me of how to go almost to both extremes. Because during a tennis match, I'm not talking during points. It's really only filling in the blanks. And then when I'm hosting the show, same deal. I'm laying out for most of the highlights, if I'm working like this week with Paul and Chanda, letting them take the reins and being more than happy to do so. So the balancing act is what makes it fun for me, is using different parts of my brain and trying to learn as much as possible too, because when I started here, I think my tennis knowledge was very limited. I was a fan. I think we talked about it to a certain degree, went to the U.S. Open every year, loved random players that maybe people didn't love to the same level, like Alex Delgapolov. But either way, I wasn't to the level of someone who knew the top 100 players inside and out. And now, after years of doing this and now following along with the sport as well, I just feel like my knowledge of the game has grown on both the men's and women's side. And that helps for when I do parachute in, I at least have a better base
for sure,
so that I can work off of that.
You haven't dropped I gotta have it like Kawhi Leonard's name in the middle of a tennis match. So that's
no,
good.
But listen, there's a funny story with that where when I was in college, so at Syracuse, it's competitive to try to get on the air, and especially to do play-by-play. And you have to create these tapes, make these tapes in practice to get good at it, and then eventually get cleared to go on the air. And so heading into my sophomore year, all summer, basically, I just did a drive of a game from a Jets game, because I was a Jets fan growing up. I just did a different drive every day from the Jets season the year before, and Ryan Fitzpatrick was their quarterback.
Okay.
So every day I'm in my phone saying, Fitzpatrick takes the snap, drops back, rolls to his right, fires on the run. It's caught at the 50-yard line by Brandon Marshall. Fitzpatrick takes the snap, hands it off, Ivory up the middle. Fitzpatrick.
Yeah.
And I get to do my first, not college, but high school football game in the area. And I believe on the first play I said, and Fitzpatrick takes a snap, and the kid's name was Jones. Like, it was not even close. So, yeah, it happens. But no, I've refrained so far, which has been good for me.
That's good. And I know you've done radio and TV already at this stage, so that's kind of the balance, too, is knowing which role and knowing to talk a little more, obviously, because you're just by yourself on the radio. I do have to ask you about last night, though, because it was brought to my attention that you were trying to kind of moonlighting or double dipping at the same time, 2 games at once. UCLA Gonzaga was going on during a Clippers game. Was that you just, feeling it out and saying, I'm just going to go for this?
Yeah, I just, whatever I feel in the moment is kind of how it works. If you've listened to my broadcast, you hear every quarter when there's 3:05 left to play, I shout out Pitbull because I just like Pitbull. And I think people have, it's to the point now where people have seen me in public and they just go, shout out Pitbull. And I'm like, what is happening right now? And then I, of course, say, dale. But, of course, naturally. And maybe Timber. But all of this to say, I think in the moment when you're taught as a broadcaster is you want to make sure your audience is informed. Right. And I know that if they're listening to me, they're not watching or listening necessarily to that game. And we're in Los Angeles. UCLA is on our sister station. So
that's maybe a good point. Yeah.
Maybe they go to us thinking that it's going to be the UCLA game. It's a critical juncture in the game. It was on in front of me. And so I had enough time in between plays where I could look down, see the play there, look back up, see the play there, and it was fun. It was a fun moment. I think everybody around me at least got a kick out of it.
I don't know what it is about UCLA and Gonzaga. Like, they're just destined to just, explode on the scene and do everything. Well, at this point, you've had a couple years under your belt now. Are you kind of seeing yourself as more of a, I don't want to say vet, but kind of peer in the broadcasting circles?
Getting there. I think the experience certainly plays a factor, but I am still fairly young, and I know that. And I never want to look at myself as someone who's seasoned necessarily, because if I look at it that way, I feel like I'll get complacent, and that's the last thing I want. I've always said, and something my dad taught me early, which is no matter how many games you've banked, how many matches you've called, how many shows you've hosted, whatever, there's always room for improvement, and you're never a finished product. And he said that he wasn't a finished product. He said Bob Costas isn't a finished product. Marv Albert, he started listing all these names. He goes, if the second that they get better, or they stop getting better rather, is the second that they should retire. And the same goes for me, and the same goes for him and anybody else. So, I see myself as someone who's got more experience and can at least utilize that to my advantage for situations like last night. But I also see myself still as the young guy who is always going to see, hey, I got something to prove. I got to show everybody what I've got.
Right. Success basically gives you another opportunity to keep getting better and keep it going. It does seem like, and with the reps that you've gotten, getting the chance to call 82 games for the Clippers plus some, I mean, the standings are a mess. I don't even try to look at the NBA.
Yeah, tied for 4th right now in the West.
2 games above the 12th seed.
They lose 2 in a row. They're out of the playoffs entirely. Yeah.
But getting the chance to call games for a team, and it seems like you guys, among NBA teams, I'd venture to say, are kind of tighter, kind of like a close-knit circle. Not that I know much about other teams, but I get the sense that that's not the case for every franchise.
No, I think that is a credit to that front office. It's no different than any other sport or any other team. The reason I think that Paul Annacone was such a successful coach in the tennis world is his manner and the type of person he is. And that's really any team aspect. So, tennis, obviously individual sport, but your team means so much, and how you handle your day-to-day, how you handle yourself mentally during a match, physically, how you're preparing and then recovering. I think the same goes for a legitimate team, a basketball team or a football team. And so from the Clippers perspective, I think a lot of credit to the front office who puts the team together, because what they did is said, we want guys that fit. We don't want guys that maybe this group stays together and this group stays together. We want a cohesive group. And so I think they've done that really well. They've planted the 2 stars in Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, and then they've basically surrounded them with skill sets and personalities that are tailor-made to fit them. And so I think they've done a really good job.
Like your broadcast team as well. I know they do some stuff out of the same building, so it's easy to see some familiar faces. But I do have a gripe with your coworker, Jamie Maggio, for the post where she said your face when you're excited to leave Cleveland. I thought that was a little blow for me.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I love Jamie, but she could have just, give me a warning before that came up.
Yeah, listen, I will say we went to Mike Fratello's house last year, and I think she had the time of her life. So I'm going to go back on her and say, hey, wait a second now. Hold on just a second. I remember you with a smile, grinning ear to ear last year leaving Cleveland.
We're going to go side note because I got to meet the czar. I have to at this point. I mean, yeah, I got to, she hooked me up with it was almost like a free cameo, basically, of a shout out with them together. But, oh, yeah, I could go 90s Cavs, talk Vitaly Potapico and Wesley Person with them for days. But that's another time. One of the things that we didn't get to talk about last year or 2 years ago when you were on this show, because I think it was right before, how did the Nickelodeon opportunity come up? And that, I mean, we've seen it now with the hockey broadcast on ESPN. This is a new counter programming. How did that even come on your radar, and what was the thought process like for you to take on that challenge?
Yeah, it was presented to me. Yeah. It was something that I didn't go seeking out, but if I knew about it, I would have, because I felt like it was tailor-made for me. I always said, how can I combine sports and entertainment? I know last time we talked about it when there was a tournament in Kazakhstan, and I did a Borat voice on the air, right? So it's always me trying to figure out how can I blend the two worlds. And basically what happened was I had this... It fell into my lap in many ways, where my agent came to me and said, hey, they're looking for someone, and your name came up to them. It was recommended to them, and they were interested. So they said, go through the interview process. So, okay, it's Zoom. It's during COVID. And I didn't know at the time that it wasn't just me. I just was on the impression of, okay, it's just me. All I have to do is impress them, and I'll get it. Or if I don't impress them, they're going to start looking at other people. I didn't know that it was actually 3 of us that they were interviewing. And so I go in just thinking it's my job, essentially, and saying, okay, I'm good. So what I did was, it was a woman, Paula Kaplan, who at the time worked at Nickelodeon, and she asked me at one point, it's not a requirement, but did you grow up watching the channel? And I go, oh, here's my time to shine. I started quoting shows. I went deep knowledge. And my knowledge was genuine because I did grow up watching the channel. So I started saying, I told this whole story about how my sister's favorite show of all time is Drake and Josh, and how she had this opportunity to meet Josh Peck multiple times, and she never took advantage of it, and how upset she was that she then got sick when he was on campus, she was in school, and they were cracking up at the story. And then now I'm doing impressions of Josh Nichols, the character, like, headaches, you give me headaches. And I'm talking about Rugrats, and then I'm talking even Legends of the Hidden Temple, and Nick Gas, and all of this.
You went back. That's
no, I did. Like, Ren and Stimpy.
I mean, that's prior to you being born. Like, those shows were 90s legend. No, that's
Double Dare.
Double Dare, yeah.
I was just going, and because there, at the time when I was growing up, there was a channel, Nick Gas. And so that literally, it played all the older shows. And so I watched Legends of the Hidden Temple. I watched Guts. I watched Kenan and Kel. I watched original All That. I watched Ren and Stimpy and Rugrats. And so
I got to put that in the Olympics, by the way. Just the aggro Craig race. International
100%, right? Can I host it? As long as I can host it, I'm down.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but I find out later, now 2-3 years after the fact, this is recent that I found out that there were other candidates, and the reason that they liked me so much was because I had the legitimate knowledge of the channel.
Wow.
And so you just never know, and that's why I make the joke now of how parents are always like, son or daughter, turn off the TV and go do your homework. I'm like, no. Keep them watching that TV. You never know what it's going to pay off one day, because honestly, it's one of the greatest things I've gotten to do.
It was a point last year where I think it was 2 years ago, where the Nickelodeon game was on, where I have a niece and nephew, and they were actually, we were watching it thinking, okay, this actually still shows you the actual game, because that was my concern. Obviously wanted you and the broadcast to do well, but the fact that we didn't know what it was at first until that Cowboys-Niners game. Did you have any idea of the spectacle that it would be? And what were the challenges of having to, see SpongeBob on there, see a coach get slime? I think they got Emmett in the stands.
Yeah, we did. No, I think the first question is a really good one that I've gotten a lot of. Did you know it was going to turn into this? The answer is no. You have no idea what it's going to be. And it was a completely blank canvas. That's what excited us. Myself, Nate Burleson, Gabby Nevaeh Green, who's up with us in the booth. Year one, it was a young man named Lex Lumpkin, was our sideline reporter. Year two, we had young Dylan, who is like the Energizer Bunny. And then year three this year, we had Dylan Schefter. But for all of us, at least that first year, and even that second year in many ways, because it still was so novel, it was a blank canvas that we got to paint the whole picture. And we got to determine how it was going to sound, how it was going to look. And Nate and I, before that first year, decided, hey, we're going to turn our phones off, or not even off, but just put them to the side, not look at them during the broadcast. We don't want to be swayed by what people are saying. We don't want to look on Twitter and have someone say X and then have it impact the way we're doing the game.
Yeah.
And so I remember the first year we were doing it was New Orleans hosting Chicago in the wild card game.
Right, yeah.
And I go to the bathroom at halftime, and my stat guy and my spotter that year turned to me, and they said, "Are you seeing the reaction?" And I go, "Is it good or bad?" They go, "You're not looking at anything?" I go, "No." They go, "Just keep doing what you're doing." I go, "Good?" They go, "The most positive reaction I've ever seen on Twitter."
It was, I don't know if people just expected the worst and were surprised, but it ended up, like that. That was the first year, and then Niners Cowboys was the second, and it was a positive reaction. I mean, you've had the fortune of timing too. You're never going to get, what was it, Patrick, when Russell Wilson throws an interception. Like the timing is just everything.
No, I mean, you got to get lucky in many ways, right? So I remember the first year we did it, so that was that first year we had Gabby in the booth, and it was her first ever game she ever went to.
Oh.
First ever football game she attended. So I said during the fourth quarter, it was a little bit of a blowout at that point. I get into my producer's ear, Ken Mack, and I said, "Hey, should we have Gabby call a play?" And he goes, "Oh, yeah, I love that." Yeah. So we tee her up, and the play was nothing. There was a penalty on the play, and she didn't know what to do with the penalty. So the timing wasn't great. So then this year he gets in my ear and he said, "Do we think we should have Patrick call a play?" I go, "Oh, 100%, 1,000%."
Yeah.
And we got, because he ended up calling like 5 of them, and all 5 of them were highlights. I mean, it was awesome.
Perfect. More with No Ego here on Tennis Channel Inside In. Your story is a very fascinating one, starting out and still just progressing up the ladder. Now back in the tennis world, I got to ask you, what's caught your eye? We're into Miami, and I'll lead in with this. It seems like your generation even is making their move and making their play here.
Even some younger than me, most younger than me, which is something I'm starting to get used to across all sports. Isn't that? Well, I was going to say, isn't that a weird time in your life where for most of your life you go, "Oh, these guys they're grown men or women," and
it's when the I don't want to say idol, but the premier, like Federer. Right. He goes, it's like, wow, like that's it. No, like I don't know if I'll ever put an athlete on that pedigree before because I'm kind of older than one.
Correct. Yeah. It's a very different feel of how it goes. But we were talking about our good friend and colleague Gil Gross before the show, and I think the last time, I'm not sure if it was already at this point yet, but when we talked about the tennis world, I had mentioned Jannik Sinner and how much of a fan I was of his, and at the time he was 18, let's say. And I felt like he had what it took to reach a mountaintop and to get to that level. And I still do in many ways. But I remember Gil saying to me, "Yeah, but he's not as good as Carlos Alcaraz." Yeah. And I go, and this was when Carlos was maybe 16 or 17. And I said, "What are you talking about, man? Have you seen what Sinner can do on the run? Like his counterattack and his ability to just give you pace right back on a full open stance." And Gil goes, "Trust me, man. Trust me." And sure enough, now every time the two of them play, Gil has to tell you, Gil reaches out, he goes, "So are you ready?" And I have apologized.
Well, I don't want to split the difference because he's right. Like, he's not as good as Carlos Alcaraz, but we're not at a point where I'm going to say Alcaraz wins every tournament.
For sure.
And I think Sinner is, you could argue, the guy that could challenge him the most.
So
if they played every out of 10 times, maybe he gets him 3.
Sure.
That's still,
and again, it goes back to the timing, right? Yeah. For Taylor Fritz last year at Indian Wells, the big breakthrough against one of the big 3, and especially against Nadal, happens to be in the final. So it's about your timing of, if you're going to win 1 out of the 10, you want the one to be in the biggest of all those matches.
Yeah.
So 100%. And I think I'm excited about that duo and that rivalry because every time they play,
it's classic.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, and even Sinner, I mean, he lost in straight sets to Alcaraz, but had a set point. It was
awesome
close.
Sets. Yes, they were epic sets.
I mean, he's as close to him as anybody, outside of obviously Djokovic still dominating. I like the American side of things for the men. The depth is at, I don't want to say an all-time high, but as high as it's been. Will the world beaters come through? Taylor Fritz has that spot. Tiafoe and Tommy Paul keep progressing. Ben Shelton's on the rise. So there are some guys to maybe, in Sebastian Korda with the wrist injury, there's some guys to monitor that maybe that 20-year slam drought can kind of come to an end.
Yeah, so I'm glad that you mentioned Tommy Paul because it was somebody for the last couple of years that had really intrigued me. And last year doing some Davis Cup in Reno, seeing him in person for the first time, like up close. Because, when we went to Roland Garros, I think he was on a side court when I was calling one of his matches. So I didn't get to see him up close. But the athleticism is impressive. He does have that natural ability. And now he's starting to put it together and stay healthy. Yeah. So I'm excited about if he can continue to build on what he's already had, and the confidence is pretty high right now. But Frances Tiafoe, to me, is the one where I look at him and I say, okay, if an American is going to take the tennis world by storm, if an American is going to take over a tournament like we saw in New York, getting into the semifinal, it's going to be him because of the entertainment factor that he brings.
You don't want to discredit or disparage any other tennis player, but Tiafoe has star power.
For sure.
If the game gets to an elite level, which it's pretty close to now, watch out. But he is the guy that your sisters, your friends that don't even follow tennis are like, oh, how's Tiafoe doing? And that's a short list.
And so it's something that you asked in the beginning here was about how I do all the different sports. And the reason I like Frances, and I know that the tennis purist isn't going to love a Nick Kyrgios, but the reason that I think he's important for the game is because of the willingness to get into it, the willingness to invite a crowd into it. And I think now more than ever, because of phone, you know, there's people on a match sitting down looking at their phone. He's someone that you're not going to want to take your eyes off the court. And I think that's incredibly imperative to keep pushing the game forward as well.
What do you think about his comments recently? I was going to actually ask you about that because that upset some people. Not the first time. It's funny. I talked to Tommy Paul years ago, and he said, I think it's annoying. It makes our sport look soft that you can't have one guy standing in the crowd from up there. But Tiafoe, for those that missed it, said he wants more people moving, more noise. It thinks it's weird. And I don't think we'll ever get to a full rock concert, but there is maybe ways to loosen a few buttons, so to speak.
I'm with it. Now, again, I'm not your traditional tennis purist. And the one thing I do love about when I was growing up going to the U.S. Open was that sense of, oh, this feels a little different. This isn't your normal sporting event. I do think there is something there. But at the same time, I think that if you keep it too rigid, you're not going to invite the masses.
I would counter, too, with have the golf model. Have a waste management style tournament. I mean, the 250s, and you can talk to any analyst or former player, and they'll say we should be trying stuff at these smaller tournaments to drum up interest. Have a tournament where it's like anything goes. Like what's the worst there?
I think the Grand Slams and the 1000s, that's going to be tough.
And Wimbledon, of course, obviously.
You're never going to change Wimbledon, and nor should you. And even Frances said that, by the way. So I would say Indian Wells, you're not changing Indian Wells. It's a fabric of the tennis community. But to your point, if you can get a 250 or maybe even a 500 that means a little something and you can get the crowd into it, that to me is where a Kyrgios, a Tiafoe, or even someone that's even more under the radar like a Bublik could really thrive. And maybe it's a breakthrough that they may have never had that opportunity before.
As long as these guys are trying, that's the part.
I think the crowd
buy
gets,
in.
100%.
Well, it's all aces for Tiafoe, except for, the celebrity game wasn't the best.
No, listen,
a little timid. I think he was just a little.
Well, I'm not going to lie to you. We've seen a lot of video of him over the last several months, especially after that U.S. Open run of him at some facilities. I know the Wizards invited him over. I'd love to work with him on his jumper, maybe his ball handling a little bit. But listen, because we know how athletic he is. That's the thing. It's definitely in there, but he doesn't have the time to actually hone his basketball game. Come on.
You need Beal, Caldwell Pope, his DC guys. 100%. Come on.
I think Kyle Kuzma could get him that jumper.
Yeah. Hey, it is just a joy to watch him play. And I don't want to discount, what the next generation of women are doing too, because that's felt like a youth movement. And I'm saying this glowingly, like a size revolution too. It's some real power. We always knew about Serena's all-time power, but this crop of just all the top women seem like they can really smash it.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think that a lot of the names that we've been hearing for years are continuously, slowly getting better. I think it was so unfair for Coco Gauff in many ways because of the early success that she had, that everybody assumed she would be as quick as Serena to get to that level.
Yeah.
But guess what? She's still incredibly young, and she just slowly gets better. She slowly plugs up holes in her game, and every time I see her on the court, she's a little more solid in one area than she was the last time. The second serve keeps getting a little better. So I think that she's not the only one of those, but there are a lot of women that fit into that mold where, because it's so wide open in many ways, and look, Iga Swiatek obviously has been dominant in her own right, but there has still been moments where I said, okay, this is still anyone's tournament.
Yeah.
And I think there's names that jump off the page to me Sabalenka is someone who you just know she's going to bring it every time. But Ons Jabeur, I mean, you want to talk about everybody's just favorite different player?
Yeah, and it's unfortunate she lost, and she's been open. She probably shouldn't be playing right now. Want to get her healthy. She's a disruptor, I
love it.
It's fun to see.
And I was glad that, we haven't talked about Breakpoint or any of that, but I was glad that they followed her. And Paul and I were talking about this the other day, but I think Breakpoint is great for your non-tennis fans. I think my mom and sister, for example, watched it. They don't watch any tennis really, or they watch maybe when I'm on, or they would come to the U.S. Open and ask me, "Oh, who's this on the court?" And I'd be like, "That's Gael Monfils. You should get to know him because he's highly entertaining." But they watched it and they'd call me after every episode and they go, "We love Ons Jabeur.
Yeah,
like, we love her. What's her deal? Is she going to win?"
Don't you think she wears the, I would say, responsibility pretty well? I mean, because she is a huge deal. Like, you can't understate how much she means to an entire region of the world.
The pressure that she must feel is immense. And to handle it with the grace that she has, and considering she hasn't won at the level that she knows she's capable at, and she's gotten so close, especially in the last 12 months, I think is incredibly impressive. So I'm excited to see how she continues to develop. I know she's a little further along in her career than maybe some of those younger names, but even so, I'm always rooting her on.
We have to wrap this up with No Eagle with a couple of fun kind of asides for where you're going with. And look, got to give you props for the Big Ten job coming up on NBC. You, Todd Blackledge, Penn State Big Ten legend himself.
That's right.
Catherine Tappan, who I loved her on the NHL coverage as well. You guys are going to be the team on Saturday night. So that opportunity is a big deal. And now you're, fully diving into the college football world, which, as you know, is about as passionate as it gets.
Different. Yeah. And I think that's what I've loved about tennis is the passion that the fans have, because if you're a legitimate tennis fan, as everybody listening is, you bleed the sport. Yeah. You eat, sleep, and do everything. Well, college football is definitely that, and depending on where you go, and I had a full season's worth of it this year, but not Big Ten prime time, what we're going to have next year. I've done some SEC, which was really impressive to see that in person, and I had a couple Big Ten games this year, but this level of going to Penn State at night, going to Ohio State at night, you know plenty about Ohio State, going to Michigan at night. It's different. It's a different feel. It's like the night session at a Grand Slam tournament where you've got two of the top players in the world, and you're getting that every single week. So it'll be exciting.
I love college football as much as anything. I don't know that I'm the biggest playoff expansion fan because the regular season is so exciting. And I'm just a little, I have my guard up because the regular season and a loss mattering means so much in that sport, and it makes the drama exciting. But hey, we're in a whole new world anyway. And,
can I make my counter argument there?
Yeah.
So right now the NCAA basketball tournament is happening.
Yeah.
What's the best part about the NCAA basketball tournament?
The upsets.
100%. Yeah. And right now we don't even have the opportunity for upsets. I'm not saying they're going to happen every year, but once in a while you're going to get one of the top teams getting upset by a non-Power 5, a Group of 5 school, and it's going to be the greatest night of the season. So would you think
12 is the number you would go to, or like?
So I said 8. Okay. If I were to do it, I would do 8. And here's how I would have done it. I would have said the 5 Power 5 conference champions. I would have said 2 just at-large bids for Power 5 schools, most likely.
Okay.
And then the best Group of 5 school gets in. And so at that point, you've got 8.
Yeah.
You just go from there.
This is a lengthy discussion that's going to be hard to capture all of it in, but my only pushback now would be, are we going to have a Power 5?
So that is a good pushback, right? And then you adjust on the fly, right? So at that point now you say, okay, there are only 3 power conferences. Let's say there's the ACC, there's the SEC, and the Big Ten. We get those 3. The rest of everybody else is trying to get at-large bids, and one of the mid-major schools, however they deem that, is guaranteed a bid.
Right, and it was good to see TCU pull the upset this year in the semis. It's
now it was brutal in the final. It happens, but guess what? That game was a classic. It's an all-timer.
Yeah, you're gonna get to a point where there's gonna be blowouts because the power at the top is still so concentrated.
Emma Raducanu winning the U.S. Open. I look at that and I take that as the example, right? Yeah. No one saw that coming, and for Leylah Fernandez to get there, that's great as well. I mean, that was just a weird year altogether in many ways, but we might never see that again. And so
Yeah, all the way through qualifying without dropping a set. That's one of the more improbable things.
Unbelievable. I don't know if we can ever see to that level, to your point, getting all the way and winning a major title like that. So I think you've got to give teams an opportunity to do the same thing.
How are you with broadcasts in terms of, do you check mentions? Are you just able to avoid it, put the phone down? Do you struggle with that?
No, I view everything, but I think I've gotten to a point where I'm pretty cognizant and I don't really let it get to me. A lot of times I find it comical in many ways, especially if it's meant as comedy. Like I think Jimmy Kimmel mean tweets, right?
Yeah.
That's a comedy. And so sometimes I look at it and I say, this would be good on Jimmy Kimmel's mean tweets, you know?
Yeah.
So that's how I've skewed it a little bit. But no, I don't. I check everything. I look at everything, but I don't really pay it too much attention.
Okay. Well, that's a strong way to look at it, I think.
Yeah,
just to kind of push stuff back. Well, I got to ask you this too. And just from a personal standpoint, how proud are you of, the next step for your dad's career? Final Four coming up.
Very, very. I think long time coming for him. And I'm excited more so for everybody else to see what he does.
Yeah.
And everybody else to feel what he brings. Because, they've gotten it for the first 2 weeks of the tournament the last several years, and before that for the first weekend of the tournament. And he does it on a grand scale, no doubt. But to do it on the grandest scale and to bring what we were talking about, blending the pop culture and to bring wordplay and to bring comedy and brevity when it requires it or calls for it, I think that people are going to really enjoy it, and it's going to open up a new audience for him. And that's what I'm excited about because he's worked really hard for it.
I feel like you've influenced him in a way. Like there's always that, but do you get that sense like your pop culture way? Because I heard the Nelly Hot and Heroine go in there, and I feel like I was watching. I'm like, that's Noah just being around him, probably.
Yeah, I don't know. I think he's had it in him. Maybe he's just been more and more willing to use it in the last several years. But
he sees his son out there. He's like, I give it.
Listen, you got to give him credit. He stays up to date on everything. He watches everything. He listens to everything. He hit some Megan Thee Stallion, I think 2 years ago, that caught fire. He had Big Lotto last year, Big Energy.
Yeah.
That was, so it's fun. He makes it fun, and that's what I'm excited for everybody to see.
Well, I did think it was funny. I'm sure Dan Fouts did a double take when he had you, and then your dad. It's like, what is going on here? Am I in a time machine?
Yeah, he goes, did Ian grow 2 inches? What happened?
What's happening? Yeah, that's one thing. You got to bring up the height every time you can.
I do. I feel a little bad, honestly, because I'm hoping that if I have a son one day, he gets 2 inches on me, and then it's just you keep going.
Couple generations,
right?
Yeah,
in like 3 generations, my kid's going to be a small forward in the NBA. My great grandson,
like 15 generations, it'll be Wembanyama.
Yeah, exactly. He's going to be built in a lab.
Yeah, and I do. So last kind of thing to get into is you called the most ridiculous NFL game of the season last year with Nate Burleson. Colts Vikings. It was a comedy, and I mean that in the best way. And you had to just not check out, I think, would be the biggest thing that broadcasters feel.
For sure. So it ended up being the largest comeback in NFL history, 33 points. It was 33-0 at halftime. And at halftime of the game, Nate and I are looking at each other and we're saying, what are we going to talk about, essentially? How can we keep the audience entertained? Now, the best education in what you just said, not giving up on a game that I've gotten with the Clippers. The last several years, the Clippers have had some of the craziest comebacks I've ever seen, including down 35 points in Washington against the Wizards. They came back second largest in NBA history, came back from down 25, game 6 against Utah, and advanced to their first ever Western Conference Finals. It taught me, stay engaged, just keep it up because you never know what happens, and that's one that'll be at the top of my list for a long time.
It was exciting to see just all your career achievements. The final question I have for you, are you even looking down the road? Are you living in the moment? You're, obviously young enough to where you don't have to think 5 years down the road, but is there radar things in the back of your mind you don't have to share where you're
I don't even know what I'm going to have for dinner tonight, honestly. So I'm
as long as there's a new sport in the Olympics, that's got to be you first.
Well, that did happen, right? Three on 3 basketball. No, it's... I'm staying in the present for sure. I think that's the best way to do it. I'm happy. As long as I'm enjoying what I'm doing and I'm challenged by it, I'm good.
We're happy to have you back in the tennis world for the time being. Got to stay here as long as you can, though.
I love it here. You know that.
Yeah, we're going to have to. We don't want to have to, kidnap you to keep you here. But,
as long as Sinner gets one of these so I can text Gil, hey, man, I told you so.
You need it, but
I do.
I do. No ego. Pleasure as always. Joy to talk to you. Thanks for coming on Tennis Channel Inside In. Always a blast.
Appreciate you, MM. This was awesome.